What's up, and welcome to another edition of the Cover 2 Recap. I'm BruinsSportsReport.com publisher Edward Lewis. As always, this is Ryan Karchi, the UCLA beat writer for the OC Register. We're here tonight once again at CSU San Bernardino, where UCLA just wrapped up practice number 3, fall camp practice number 3. Ryan, was a pretty interesting day today. They actually put on shoulder pads, had helmets, got a little hitting done, a lot of 11 on 11. It wasn't as boring as the first couple of days have been. The news and notes were a little bit light today. Cameron Griffin was out in a sling, but he was out there. He had a jersey on and looked pretty healthy. We still haven't got an update on what his status is, but we'll find out later. Thomas Duarte kind of limped around practice a bit today. Didn't really play in 11-11s, but he looks fine. And Alex Redmond left early with cramps/heat exhaustion, but he looks fine as well. Two other guys that missed practice day that I was going to kind of segue into what we want to talk about here on the Cover 2 Recap. Connor McDermott and Simon Goins both sat out kind of as precautionary moves, but it led to kind of an interesting twist on the offensive line that I want you to explain.
Yeah, Adrian Clem told us that last night he decided that he wanted to shake things up on the offensive line a little bit. He moved Malcolm Bunch, who by all accounts has looked significantly better so far in camp, significantly thinner than he was, in a lot better shape. He moved him out to left tackle, which, the first result of what we saw today was great. I mean, he was holding his own with Oo Odigizua on the edge, and he's kind of got that mauler style that, I know Clem said they haven't really had before. So he said after watching Bunch a little bit during practice that they actually opened up their scheme and changed a little bit on offense to do things that they hadn't been able to do before. But that move to move Bunch to left tackle kind of had a snowball effect on the rest of the line. Caleb Benenoch moved to the right side. Alex Redmond ideally would slot in at left guard, and right guard Scott Quessenberry, who started obviously half the season last year, kind of stepped into that role, and it seemed like from talking to Clem that's kind of where they want him to stick. Najee Torin, the freshman, he's kind of got that same mauler mentality. He'll definitely push him at that spot, but at this point I think Clem kind of said that Quessenberry's experience would give him a leg up. So I think you can kind of count on that to be the offensive line going forward. Bunch at left tackle, Redmond at left guard, Brendel still at center, right guard Quessenberry, right tackle Benenoch. The interesting part is, obviously Simon Goins started the last 2 years, had an injury. They were kind of all expecting him, and we were expecting him to push for that starting job. But now it seems like he's kind of that odd man out.
Connor as well. Connor last fall, or fall camp here in San Bernardino, was arguably the best tackle on this team. So when he comes back healthy and is 100% and plays like he did last fall, what happens then? I mean, Clem now actually has an offensive line and maybe a second-string offensive line, which would be the first time in his 3 years here at UCLA.
Yeah, with Goins too, especially. I know Clem said that his physical injuries have kind of taken a mental toll, and that he's been kind of shy and not as assertive as maybe you need to be when you're in a position where you're obviously the guy they're leaning on in the run game at right tackle. But at this point, I think you can kind of leave him out of the picture. I think assuming Benenoch looks so good in the spring and he hasn't really done anything to make me expect anything less of him in the fall, and with Bunch doing as well as he is, like you said, there's actual depth there, which I think, Clem was obviously pretty tickled by. He's not really used to that sort of thing.
Let's get into top performers. It was a shoulder pads practice. There was a lot of hitting, kind of their first hitting since the spring. It was actually pretty interesting. Give me two guys that kind of popped to you today.
Maybe this is an obvious one, but given how much nitpicking there's been and how he struggled a little bit in the first two practices, I thought Brett Hundley had a great day throwing the ball. He had a few that were just fit into beautifully tight windows. A few that were, right out of the reach of Fabian Moreau, who's, clearly been the best defensive back in practice thus far. He had the deep ball working a little bit. He was more accurate on his short passes. And in 7-on-7, he looked better in his read. So I was impressed. And, my second guy would be, I already mentioned him, Fabian Moreau. I thought he had a great day. At this point, it's very clear that he's one of the better, cornerbacks in the Pac-12. He's just got this this anticipation where Devin Lucien was talking about it, where you can maybe think that you have him beat, but then he recovers so quickly. And I think having a guy like that in your secondary that can, shut down one side of the field is invaluable. And at this point, I don't even think we've seen the best out of Fabian Moreau.
My top performers actually come from the secondary as well. I couldn't decide between Ishmael Adams and Tahan Goodman, so I decided on them both here. Tahan was his usual self today. He had one play that really stood out, which is why I want to put him on here, was Jerry Neuheisel threw a ball over the middle, and it kind of surprised Tahan, and he was going one way, and the ball was coming the other way, and he just made this play where he contorted his body and knocked the pass away, almost picked it off, and it's just like we all turned to each other on the side. Wow. I mean, he is a special talent. Ishmael Adams has been kind of the same player these last 3 days, just sticky, super sticky, won't let anybody off of him. I think Devin Lucien had the best description of him. He called him 4'11" and just gets underneath you and jams you, and I thought that was funny. But the other guy that I think deserves mention on here is Kenny Young, the linebacker. He had probably the hit of the day, kind of running into the middle of the line and stifling Craig Lee in the middle of the hole, and huge pop, and everybody's oohing and ahhing in the crowd. He's actually been almost by far the best freshman out here now, and I think that's pretty clear that he's going to have a pretty big impact, if not on the starting unit or second string unit, at least on special teams, because he's that good.
At this point, I wonder with him, we've seen a little bit of Zach Whitley. I thought he looked, better today when we saw a little bit more of him. But it'll be interesting to see if he pushes Whitley for maybe a spot in that rotation at middle linebacker.
That'll wrap up our coverage from day 3 of fall camp. As always, you can follow Ryan Karchi on Twitter at Ryan_Karchi. You can follow me on Twitter at EdwardLewisBSR. Until the next time, thanks for tuning in to the Cover 2 Recap.